I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Karthik is a partner with Everest Group's global sourcing practice, which is focused on helping enterprises and global business services with growth, optimization, and workforce strategy decisions. Anil, Vice President, leads Everest Group's service automation technologies practice and assists in technology themes related to robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, and process mining that are disrupting the way global services are being delivered. Bharath is a practice director with Everest Group's global sourcing practice and assists enterprises and GPS clients on topics related to GPS, growth evolution, and adoption of intelligent automation solutions. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Karthik. Take away, Karthik.
Hey, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thanks for your time and for joining this webinar. Today is an exciting topic around accelerating the adoption of intelligent automation. This is a topic, honestly, that's been spoken about for many years. The reason we wanted to cover this today is that the crisis has provided a unique opportunity and an imperative for companies to accelerate on this journey. So we thought we would use today's webinar to talk to you about our own experiences in this space, what we're seeing in the market, and some pointers or advice for enterprises in scaling up their intelligent adoption journeys. But before we get started, what do we really mean by intelligent automation? And there are different definitions in the market. The way we define intelligent automation is a combination of multiple technologies, right? So these include RPA and RDA, which have been historically associated with automation, but it also includes the emerging new areas like intelligent document processing, intelligent virtual agents, bespoke AI solutions, plus what you would call the orchestrating layer in terms of business process management and the layer of analytics that is a wraparound to all of this, right? This could include process mining, business intelligence. So as we talk about intelligent automation, it is beyond just robotic process automation and includes all these technologies and orchestrating layers. So as I mentioned in my opening remark, automation is not a new concept. Intelligent automation is not a new concept either. However, as enterprises are looking to scale their automation journeys, what are their key priorities? Especially in the context of the crisis. There are three key priority areas for enterprises. The first is to accelerate adoption of RPA, right? And this, the reason is straightforward. They've always been looking to accelerate, but given the cost pressures and the opportunity to drive significant efficiencies, there is an reinvigorated focus on intelligent automation in context of the crisis. The second priority is to really extract greater value from the program. So it's not only about efficiencies and cost savings. It's also about how intelligent automation can actually make the process more effective. It's also about how to leverage the power of human and technology to drive greater value to the process. And the third is kind of linked to accelerating adoption, but really about enabling the enterprise-wide participation. We're going to talk more about it in the later part of the webinar on how automation has become and can become a powerful enterprise-wide mandate, as opposed to just being limited to a few businesses or a few parts of the organization. Okay, so just to move on to run the discussion today, we've got a set of convictions, provocations, and controversies. Okay? So what do we mean by this? And some of you might be familiar with these terms that we use if you've attended our past webinars. So convictions are essentially our foundational beliefs about the market. So let's start with that. Um, uh, we have sort of 4 convictions we want to talk to you about today. The first is that automation has become a C-suite agenda item. So this is no longer about, what a process owner thinks about automation as a priority, or one business thinking about automation as a priority. This is really about automation becoming a C-suite agenda item. Right? So let's talk about what that really means. First is that there is an increased focus on automation solutions, and COVID-19 has intensified the need. What you see on this slide are a few results from the surveys that we've conducted in the past few months. So greater than 80% of enterprises see automation as a key lever to support cost optimization and resilience. Not only from a GBS standpoint, but if you also consider the third-party service providers, majority of the service providers, the enterprises are asking them to restructure their automation programs. One key driver for this is resilience. Now, as you all might be aware, there are different factors driving automation adoption. Cost savings being one, increasing operational efficiency and quality, increasing employee productivity and experience. So what this really means is that the employee time is freed up for more high value added activities, right? That both increases productivity and their overall experience of working with the firm. Improving governance and compliance, right? Reducing chances of errors. Then what you call here are the strategic impacts of automation. So enhancing the customer experience, right? Creating new business models that disrupt competition, and laying the groundwork for a broader digital transformation agenda. But in all these, one theme that has become really prominent in the past 6 months is around resilience. So very simply put, the more automated a process or a set of processes are, it reduces dependence on people and is better equipped to handle pandemic type situations. So traditionally, levers of resilience have been, having multiple locations, right? Or having the work distributed across multiple teams. But now the crisis has created a huge opportunity for intelligent automation becoming a key driver in accelerating its adoption. Now, as we move on, not only have the drivers changed, the key focus of enterprises in terms of driving intelligent automation have changed significantly. The first being that from a cost and efficiency improvement lever, this has become now a clear C-suite agenda item and is an integral part of digital transformation initiatives. Now, previously, in my own experience, the focus of intelligent automation was to target low-hanging fruit. So you say, okay, this is the process that is easiest to automate. Let's get some quick wins. Now, the focus is on demonstrating tangible business outcomes. So this could mean creating disrupting business models, improving customer experience. Earlier, the approach was largely siloed adoption. So what do we mean by that? It may be in one part of the GBS or captive organization. It may be done in one business, one geography. But now the focus is on enabling greater participation from the businesses. We're going to talk about what an enterprise-wide mandate means as we move along, and establishing operating procedures which the broader enterprise can benefit from. Tools and technology, those have moved from largely being RPA and RDA. So RDA is kind of robotic desktop automation, and RPA is robotic process automation, to now the focus is on leveraging of artificial intelligence in conjunction with RPA for even judgment intensive tasks. We're going to talk about that later on in the session. Talent strategy, initially the focus was on the external ecosystem, right? Third-party vendors, tool providers. Now there is a greater role for in-house resources, which includes upskilling and reskilling in-house talent to support the growth of RPA. Before we move on further, we've got a poll question for you coming up. Where is your organization on its automation adoption journey? And we've got 4 options here for you. The first is siloed adoption and limited to a few businesses. The second is coordinated adoption. So there are some common threads, some synergies, but still limited to a few businesses. Third is coordinated across multiple businesses. And the fourth is really coming top down, right? It's an enterprise-wide strategic mandate with a COO or a CIO priority, which is then cascading down the organization. So just wanted to give you some time to choose the best option that applies to your organization. Okay, this is a fairly distributed mix, not surprising to what I would have expected. What is interesting is a quarter of the respondents saying automation is an enterprise-wide strategic mandate. Now, if we had run the same poll 2 years back, this would have looked very different. And this is testimony both to the success of automation and, more importantly, the imperative to accelerate automation driven by the crisis. On that note, let's just move on to the next slide. What do we mean when we talk about an enterprise-wide strategic program? In our view, it has got 4 characteristics. First is there is a dedicated funding for intelligent automation. So this is a clear investment which the organization is making. And this is not, this may be coupled with things like analytics, but it isn't competing with other initiatives. So it's a dedicated funding. The second is a well-defined mandate for business leaders. So when we say mandates, we mean both permission to go and implement enterprise-wide automation in their own businesses, but also clear goals for them to achieve. The third is an operating model that enables firm-wide participation. Now, this is interesting because many enterprises operate as decentralized businesses, right? Either by business or by geography. We're going to talk later today about what types of operating models are best suited to firm-wide participation. The fourth is around well-established awareness programs around both the benefits of intelligent automation and also how to go about implementing intelligent automation and the change management protocols. With that, let me move on to the next conviction. Till now, I spoke about automation becoming a C-suite agenda for the overall enterprise. Now, in this, the GBS organization plays a significant role. So just before I hand it over to Bharat, when we say GBS, we mean Global Business Services, which is usually an internal organization, may include some outsourcing as well, often used with different terms in the market, or shared services. Places like India, we use global capability centers. So different terminologies, but essentially a global business services group that's driving synergies and value for the organization. Now, our conviction is that they have not only had an important role to play, they will have an even larger role to play in driving automation. Bharat, what do you think?
Absolutely, Karthik. In fact, if there has been one key theme that has really dominated the growth and evolution story of GBS in recent past, I would say automation, or at least it's among those top themes that have really enabled GBS organizations to kind of, give an opportunity to deliver greater value for the overall enterprise. And in many ways, come to think about it, the GBS organization is also quite uniquely positioned to support something like an automation initiative across the enterprise. Some factors that I could think of the top of my mind would be, they have an established foundation and a strong domain understanding of how things work in the organization, quite a tight integration with the core business, experience across many lines of businesses, existing focus on continuous improvement, and so on. And in general, also the point around increased endorsement that enterprises have for GBS centers in recent past. To put this in perspective, we did a quick analysis of some 175 to 200 enterprises that have GBS centers. And these are enterprises that have GBS centers across the globe. Out of that, more than 2/3 of them are playing some role or the other in automation. And if we were to do a double click on these GBS, over 45% of them, close to half of them, are actually playing a leader or an influencer role. By this, what we mean is that the role of GBS in the overall automation program is not limited to just providing ad hoc or, let's say, a particular development kind of support, but rather playing a key role in the overall strategy, influencing decisions, and even going beyond other aspects to other aspects such as, let's say, change management, creating awareness about the program, conducting workshops or events, and managing libraries and so on. And in this journey, if we were to talk about how GBS have evolved even in the automation journey, 3 years back, majority of them were still in the planning or POC stages, trying to figure their way around the technology and the governance models. Today, we see more and more GBS organizations focusing on scaling up or the steady state when it comes to driving automation. By this, what we mean is that the best in class or the mature adopters, in those cases, the GBS is running automation, intelligent automation, business as usual. So there's a regular pipeline building activity, and then there is clear staffing and development, deployment, ongoing monitoring. It's just a well-oiled machine, and it's just running smoothly. And interestingly, this shift from earlier stages of planning, conducting pilots, and so on to steady state has kind of seen a shift even in terms of the technology usage. And in the next conviction that we have, we're kind of talking more about how the technology shift has taken place. RPA is kind of a thing of the past if you were to look at it in some ways, and intelligent automation has taken a front seat. And let me invite my colleague Anil to share some more light on this.
Yeah, thanks, Bharat. So if we look at the overall ecosystem, we can see that we started with attended automation through robotic desktop automation or RDA, and quickly moved to unattended robotic process automation or RPA. Currently, while RPA has become fairly commonplace in automation circles, we are definitely moving beyond the world of just RPA for automation to one that combines AI solutions along with RPA. Of course, RPA deals with transactional, repetitive, rules-based tasks, and AI solutions predominantly seek to address judgment-oriented problems. So while individually they deal with different kinds of tasks or situations, the combination, which is intelligent automation, can of course drive more end-to-end automation. And if we move to the next page, we can see that this journey towards intelligent automation is only going to accelerate. So one of the recent studies that we did clearly indicated that enterprises are investing heavily in AI-based automation. Currently, while only half of automation deployments have an AI component to them, 2/3 of the planned deployments for the next 12 months are either standalone artificial intelligence, and an example of that would be standalone chatbots, or deployments that combine, let's say, AI and RPA. For instance, something like an IDP and an RPA coming together for invoice processing or AP processes. So what does this mean for enterprises? Now, of course, you need to be looking at more AI-based solutions and what they can do for you. But you should also be thinking about enabling constructs around intelligent automation. So this will include things like, the nature of automation talent itself, and you should be thinking about it from a perspective of, the broadened mandate. The data strategy required to enable AI. And again, keep in mind, data is critical to any AI-based solution. And unless you're able to have a measured data strategy, enabling artificial intelligence at scale is always going to be a challenge. And the other critical point to consider in this journey is, of course, the mindset change to envision more end-to-end automation and the accompanying change management as well. So with all that said, we believe that enterprises have still barely scratched the surface when it comes to intelligent automation, and that is our next conviction. And we can actually see that in the gap that exists between typical enterprises, which are currently doing automation today, and the maximum achievable automation, which is at the other end of the spectrum. So if you look at the next page, we see that there is actually a huge gap between these 2 points, right? And that represents what most of the enterprises today are leaving on the table in terms of the automation opportunity. So how do we go about capturing that opportunity? So in answering this question, I think it's instructive to look at how best-in-class enterprises have fared. And in the multiple years that we have been tracking the space, we have found that best-in-class enterprises are consistently ahead of their peers, not just in terms of scale and size of their automation programs, but several other important metrics as well. So for instance, one of our studies showed that best-in-class enterprises on an average achieve 1.4 times the return on investment. They achieve more improvement in operational metrics. Again, 1.7 times the impact on strategic outcomes as well, right? Even more importantly, or more significantly, while there is still some way for them to go, they seem to be moving towards the finish line of maximum achievable automation at a much faster pace. So then this in essence means that they are actually widening the gap with their peers year on year, and thereby building a competitive advantage through their approach. Now, while there is no one size fits all, there are certain guiding principles or philosophies that best-in-class enterprise adopt that seem to be consistently paying off. And we'll talk about some of these as we get into our next section on provocations. But before that, we have a poll for you.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Anil. The poll we have for you is around what is your organization's biggest challenge in scaling automation, right? And we are defining scaling as, not scaling from, 30 to 50 bots, but really, moving towards more of a enterprise, pan business mandate. Of course, all of these are, challenges that organizations encounter. But the poll question for you is, what is the single biggest challenge in your organization's experience? Okay, interesting. The top one is on identifying opportunities and sustaining pipeline. The next one equally split between, a talent issue, aligning stakeholders, managing change, right? I am a little surprised about identifying opportunities and sustaining pipeline being the the single largest challenge, because the canvas of the addressable opportunities pretty much is quite significant. But perhaps the way to read this is the fact that making this a qualified pipeline that can translate to implementation, can be the challenge. And we'll talk about, a bit later on today as we move on, how have companies, look to address some of these challenges. With that, let's move on to the provocations, right? Sorry, before that, we have a call to action, meaning an opportunity for you to get a automation maturity assessment on a complimentary basis. So you can choose any of these 3 benchmarks, right, from a standard set of 12 metrics that are listed on this, and share your information, and then we will get back to you with a quick market benchmark and qualitative insights on mature adopters best practices, right? This will be a more of a quick high level benchmark. There is a quick poll that you will see on your screen on if you would like to request our automation maturity assessment. Just want to give you some time to answer this poll. Otherwise, you will also see this on the chat box, and something that the option on whether to opt in or not is something that we will also share with you via a quick poll towards the end of the webinar. But you also see this on the link that's in your chat bot. If you would like to avail of this complimentary automation maturity assessment, let us know. Share with us your data on the 3 metrics that you would like to be benchmarked, and we'd be happy to share a complimentary assessment. Okay. With that, let's move on to the provocations. And when we say provocations, so till now we talked about convictions, which are our foundational beliefs in the market. Provocation is our value creation ideas for enterprise organizations. Bharat, you've got the first one coming up, so over to you now.
Thanks, Karthik. The first provocation that we have today for you is around the leverage that the right CoE model can provide. In my experience of working with enterprises, GBS, and observing this market, tracking it for the past 3 to 4 years, the biggest difference that I've observed when it comes to best in class and the rest of the market is actually around how the CoE model works. In many ways, the CoE model ties in very well with almost all the other aspects. So you may have a great understanding of the technology or have access to more skilled talent or the leadership buy-in to accelerate, but none of that will really work well unless you have the right model. And to talk a little more about that, it's actually worth taking a quick look at the evolution of CoE model over the years. And we have that on the page here. When 3-4 years when enterprises started getting into RPA and intelligent automation in this form, the adoption was largely siloed, as Karthik also mentioned earlier in the session. By this, what we mean is that the solutions were explored, developed, deployed largely within specific business verticals or in geographies or in certain entities in the enterprise. The focus primarily was to gain a better understanding of technology, try it out and see how the benefits are coming. But this had its own challenges, right? The best practices sharing or reusing of assets and components of automation was not facilitated in this model. And that's when firms, enterprises eventually moved towards the centralized model. And we in the last 2 to 3 years, I think we have seen a lot of firms consolidating disparate initiatives, that are being run across the enterprise into a single umbrella. There are great benefits from a centralized model, wherein you've got better governance, control over how the solutions are being deployed, better best practices sharing, expanding the coverage, and so on. But at the same time, the centralized model also has certain challenges in terms of the agility and the pace in which deployments or scaling up can really take place. For instance, the CoE invariably takes up the ownership or the responsibility for identifying pipeline, building it, and then testing out solutions, getting stakeholder buy-in, and so on. And that's when kind of the federated model emerged, more so in the last 12 months or so. And this is a model which takes key elements from both of the other models. So by that, what we mean is that this provides the independence for businesses to run automations on their own. At the same time, also has a governing layer, which can help with overall managing and overseeing. To talk a little bit more about the differences, let's see some of these differences in the next page. As I mentioned earlier, the centralized model offers a lot of benefits, but the key challenge is around the mandate for generating outcome and execution, which in a centralized model lies with the CoE, whereas in a federated model, the onus of driving automation and realizing benefits is shifted to the businesses or the entities that are essentially running the automations. This is also accompanied by the focus on execution. So the CoE perhaps handles certain exceptions or complex automations, whereas almost all of the ongoing regular automations, be it attended, unattended, exploring even AI-based solutions like intelligent document processing or building chatbots, most of that is kind of shifted to the businesses or the entities in a federated model. And that in a way gives greater flexibility to businesses as well, by virtue of having better understanding, control, and having a better grasp of the processes where it's being developed and deployed. And in a way, this also helps in each business identifying the talent requirements that they may need, be it in identifying processes or supporting the discovery stage, or be it in deployment, post-monitoring support, and so on. And the governance being something that's still residing with the overall CoE, so that there is greater control over the overall program. Aspects such as security, reusability, procuring licenses, utilization management, things like that are taken care of. Now, the big question that comes up is federated model the only model, or is it the best fit model per se? Now, we're not necessarily saying that the federated model is the only one that works well or assists when it comes to scaling up. But from what we have observed, at least some of the mature adopters, the tenured ones, this federated model provides greater flexibility, greater business participation, and has definitely aided these firms scale up faster. This typically works well in large organizations with multiple businesses, so firms that have different IT systems, platforms, and so on, wherein individual businesses can kind of take this up and have it as their mandate, and then drive adoption faster. And that's something which we have observed across many mature adopters. With that, moving on to the next provocation. Now, this is an interesting one. This also, in a way, kind of talent question. It also kind of has implications across the entire automation journey in different aspects of it. Now, the provocation that we have here for you is around a citizen-led model. Are you using, or are you leveraging your individual business resources to support your automation program? It is a powerful leader to address your talent needs. So what exactly is a citizen model? These days, we're already seeing a lot of talent terms, and I promise you the intention is not to add to that list. Very simply put, a citizen model is essentially one where it refers to business resources or subject matter experts participating in either execution, development, deployment, or even discovery stage of automation. By this, what we mean is resources who would otherwise be part of regular delivery, It could be someone who is supporting, let's say, an invoice processing or an HR data management, and not necessarily somebody with a development skill or a very strong IT background per se. Also to note is that when we say a citizen model, this is separate from the continuous improvement or business excellence or the Lean Six Sigma kind of groups. Those groups are still relevant, but here the focus is on the business resources supporting automation. Now, what are the benefits and the challenges of driving or leveraging these business resources? One of the biggest benefit here is these resources are the ones who are doing the work day in, day out on which you are exploring automation initiatives. By having a better business context and understanding how there is the data flows, how the process flows, and so on, the opportunity for improving certain aspects of the process itself is much higher. So there is an accelerated opportunity identification by virtue of the same set of people doing the process and supporting automation. There is also a better change management process that is invariably happening in this kind of a model. While there are benefits, there are certain challenges as well with this model. One of them is investing in training, which also means balancing regular ongoing operations delivery and automation specific kind of focus. In some cases, we have observed that the quality of solutions, especially in initial stages of automation, tend to be slightly lower as compared to what you would expect out of a seasoned, let's say, a solution architect and a software developer and so on. And another challenge that we have observed is there are some instances where there is a higher attrition for some of these trained resources. Having said that, the model is definitely picking up and the benefits seem to be outweighing some of the challenges. In fact, we are seeing many firms leveraging this model, in fact, even in a more programmatic manner as well. So if we move to the next slide, to talk a little bit more about how the citizen model is being leveraged. Primarily, there are three different stages that we have observed. One being a very opportunistic or an ad hoc kind of a leverage, and that eventually going to the third stage, which is more of a programmatic leverage. The first stage is where these citizen resources are encouraged to participate in, let's say, contributing ideas or being an integral part of the overall automation journey. And this is where some aspects of the culture shift also happens. And in many ways, change management also happens here, getting more involvement from the resources. Typically in this first stage, the involvement in development or writing codes or deploying solutions per se is lower. And some of the training programs that are being leveraged are largely the ones that are available third parties, in many cases, complementary training modules. The second stage is where these resources with some bit of knowledge and understanding of the market kind of start developing certain type of automations, maybe start with easy ones that are generally rule-based. There are more the automation tools and components provide you UI-based aspects of learning and building bots, which kind of is easier to track and easier to deploy. And the final stage, the programmatic leverage is where you've got business resources who otherwise support ongoing operations are involved in regularly in development and deployment of even complex solutions. So that's the kind of opportunity that is there. And there are organizations that are already in the programmatic leverage stage as well. In fact, some of them even have very, very targeted training programs that include even classroom kind of training for let's say 2 weeks to 4 weeks to help these resources get first-hand experience of how you can drive and deploy these solutions. And by having this citizen model to augment the existing workforce, it has kind of worked very well for these organizations to further bring in the culture of change and leverage of automation solutions and also scale up faster. Again, to tie back to the earlier point on operating model, this is something that may not be very relevant or feasible in a centralized or a siloed kind of a model. And that's where a federated model also helps in giving that flexibility to businesses to have that opportunity or have that oversight to see what resources can be deployed towards development or training when it comes to automation, and then eventually support automation initiatives in addition to delivery. We do expect to see this model to pick up more and take a more formal shape in the next 12 to 18 months, especially with the mandate from our C-suite kind of increasing for automation. With that, let's move to the next provocation. And the third one is kind of an interesting one. I mean, again, goes to the point on you may have right set of capabilities, right set of talent, but are you really using the right set of metrics to really track your progress, so that you're kind of understanding where you are. So for that, let me invite Anil to kind of share his views on that.
Thanks, Bharat. So if we move to the next page, we'll illustrate this point by looking at 3 enterprise examples. Right, and these are actual enterprise cases, by the way. So I mean, it's tied to real life in that sense, right? So in this particular scenario, enterprise A has more than 1,000 bots. Enterprise B has around 500 robots, and C has, say, around 200 robots. Now, most enterprises look at number of robots as a key indicator of progress, and by that measure, enterprise A is, of course, doing much better than the rest. But when we look at the full picture, we can see that enterprise C is actually, what enterprise C is doing, in fact, matters much more, since it is delivering the highest return on investment and the greatest cost savings on a similar investment base. Now, of course, this is a simplified example because we haven't taken into consideration the timeline of the investment cycle and so on. But the point remains that if you truly want to get a real understanding of where you are and what you need to fix potentially, you need to look at different metrics in combination, not just the vanity ones in isolation. Now, very often you need to move beyond traditional metrics as well. And it does feel weird to talk about traditional metrics in an area that's possibly only a few years old. But regardless, you need to look for alternate metrics to give you the whole picture. And again, I'll walk through a few examples based on our own work and experience. So, for instance, you may be seeking to measure, let's say, outcomes to understand where you are in your journey and where you're headed. So in that case, beyond just the number of bots and again, growth in number of robots, consider metrics like share of AI-based deployments, because these are simply lead indicators and give you a good picture of where you're headed. And of course, it's easier to course correct if you have a forward-looking view. Similarly, you may be measuring capability metrics to understand where you can improve. And here also make sure that you're getting the right picture. So let me elaborate on what I mean again by speaking through one case that we looked at recently. So in that particular case, an efficiency metrics that you'll see on the left-hand side, that is time to deployment, was very high compared to the peer group for this particular organization. Now, seemingly this was a cause for concern, but on double-clicking and breaking this down into components, we found that the biggest contribution to this time came from the time spent on re-engineering or fixing the process before automation. And this is a metric on the right-hand side. Now, the key to interpreting this result was actually viewing it in combination with the savings per process and the subsequent realization that the additional time spent on re-engineering actually helped or resulted in much higher ROI and savings for this enterprise compared to its peers. So in this scenario, the composite metric value of higher deployment time was not really a cause for concern, but rather a good thing or a best practice even, right? So yes, the crux of the matter is being able to measure relevant metrics. And again, this doesn't really mean that you indiscriminately start measuring everything. What enterprises should be looking at is, it really depends on where you are in your journey, how your automation program is structured, and where you want it to go. But nevertheless, measuring relevant metrics and then being able to piece together the story through these metrics and how they interact with one another is really critical for continuous improvement. So often it's the case that to course correct, you just need to take a scalpel to the program rather than a bludgeon, and a good understanding of what to measure and how to interpret it helps avoid a whole lot of unnecessary pain. If we move to the next slide, again, we are providing an opportunity to access some of these more meaningful metrics. And of course, if you missed out on the poll question earlier, do feel free to reach out to us after the webinar. Our contact information will also come up on screen later. So finally, on the next slide, we have some controversies. And this is the final section. So these are, issues for which we don't necessarily have the answer. These are in some ways still playing out, but good to ponder over nevertheless. So the first one is best of breed versus platform approach. Now, this is, of course, a classic tech debate, one which really hasn't been resolved in many of the software sectors. It also tends to be somewhat cyclical, right? One classic example of this is how SAP and Oracle ERPs came about, through acquisitions, through building of different modules, and then after a while you had Workday come in, and that started chewing away at the HR bits. And now Workday is again adding in its own finance and accounting module and becoming an ERP in its own right. So in a sense, there's no saying how this will play out for automation, but you have various players now stepping into the automation game through acquisition, and it's making the whole landscape interesting. You have big tech or system of record players like Microsoft, SAP, etc. Throwing their hat in the ring with RP acquisitions. You have system integrators and BPO players like IBM joining the fray as well. So it's going to be an interesting evolution, no doubt, but we are yet to see the balance tilt decisively one way or the other. The second controversy that we have is, will automation lead to newer sourcing strategies? So for instance, can you automate at source, or will you want to centralize and offshore before automating? So which one is a better approach, and a whole bunch of other connected questions there. And then finally, the third one is, to what extent can you push the citizen-led model? Of course, Bharat spoke about this at some length earlier, and we do believe that the citizen-led model is underused currently. But what is the full extent of leverage that you can derive from that model? Is it feasible to move to a completely citizen-led model, or is that too ambitious? Again, the answer is, of course, likely to be somewhere in between, but where exactly that balance is, the jury is still out on this one. So with that, we come to the conclusion of the presentation, and happy to take up questions now. Karthik.
Hey, thanks, Anil. As we had expected, lots of good questions. Let me start with one for you, Anil. So there's a question around which industries are leading in intelligent automation adoption, and which ones are lagging behind, and why. So do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So in many ways, it's not a surprise that some of the more let me say technology forward industries are looking to adopt automation at a larger scale. And also, there are components of volume and cost saving and regulation which comes in, right? But to answer the question, the biggest adopters that we see are the BFSI vertical. We see a good deal of adoption, of course, in healthcare and pharma, CPG and retail, high tech and telecom as well, right? So these are some of the bigger adopters. Some of the laggard, so to speak, and again, I don't want to necessarily label a whole industry a laggard, because it does vary by player. But some of the interesting ones are, so for example, the oil and gas sector, right? Again, there are a few players there who are ahead in adopting automation, but as a sector as a whole, seems to be less focused on automation there. And then you have government and public sector. Government and public sector, I'll put in a caveat here. When we look at certain slices of automation, they seem to be on the up and up, particularly intelligent document processing. But overall, in terms of adoption, government and public sector can do better.
Okay. Thanks, Bharat. The question for you. You talked about the federated CoE model, right? So is that typically what you would recommend as the best fit model, or other scenarios where it is not the best fit, right? And a related question, how long does it really take to move from a, say, centralized model to a federated CoE model?
Thanks, Karthik. That's actually a great question and a very relevant one as well. So the biggest point about the federated model is not about, let's say, the model has 6 or 7 elements, we need to pick all of them. But the primary aspect of that is to enable the businesses or the real consumers of automation to have greater control over the investments and the outcomes that are coming out of it. So in some firms, let's say smaller organizations, the need to move to a federated model may not be as high, given that the businesses can already be a little tightly integrated and very the need for or having a siloed kind of a view is lesser. But essentially or typically in larger organizations with multiple entities across geographies, this model kind of works better. Again, when it comes to the time taken to shift from one model to other, it is a journey. It does take time. You can't switch on, switch off, and move the responsibility from the CoE to the business. But as I said earlier, the bigger focus here is to bring in that culture and the mindset change of driving these solutions more independently by businesses, as compared to having the CoE or another entity drive it for you. I think that culture shift, probably the sooner that gets, the sooner kind of the shift to the federated model can also work.
Hey, thanks, Bharat. There's another question which is kind of built off the poll that we had, right? While around identifying opportunities and sustaining pipeline was the single biggest challenge as expressed by the by webinar participants. Anil, what practices have you seen adopted in mature organizations to deal with this challenge?
Yeah, so this is kind of a sustaining challenge, right? I mean, in many ways, RPA, the canvas in which RPA can paint is quite large, right? So prioritizing and identifying those opportunities is in and of itself a challenge. And then of course, you need to go through the whole qualification and get to a place where you actually get ROI. So this is, like I said, it's a well-known challenge. So some of the ways that we have seen this being tackled is simply by using multiple approaches, right? Now, one of them is the top-down approach, where typically you have maybe a workshop or a brainstorming session with function leaders, etc., and try to identify from a top-down perspective, what are the key opportunity areas which you can start to pick off, right? And it's typically employed at the start of any automation journey, because it delivers quick returns, right at the start of the program, right? Then after that is when the pipeline may end up drying up, and which is where we see certain organizations also jump in and come up with a grassroots approach or a crowdsourcing approach. And again, employees are incentivized in many cases to come up with good ideas for identifying automation opportunities. This of course goes through a whole stage gate, it goes through a qualification mechanism, etc., and the best ones are selected for implementation. The third one, which we are increasingly seeing now, and this is happening in a lot of the more mature adopters, is there is this whole process mining and discovery tools being employed. So these are technology tools that can actually identify the various kinds of processes, what variants are there for those processes. It can map out different steps. It can look at things like frequencies, exceptions, the happy path, etc. And a lot of these are either based on system logs or based on clickstream recording. Now, it's still early days for this technology, and some of it is still maturing. But we would expect in the future, or even right now, right, the adoption of these kind of technologies to increase to actually automate some of the process identification or process discovery part of it.
Okay, thanks. There's another question which maybe I'll take up. What levels of automation are we seeing in governance and management of outsourced operations, right? Not a lot, but there are some activities in here where we are seeing automation. So for example, creating, automated dashboards, right? If the metrics are fairly standardized, and you're getting a typical output back from your service providers, the outsourced providers, then we're seeing some automation in the analytics around it, right? The other areas that we're seeing some automation is on really monitoring outputs, right? Things like number of transactions, etc. So these are some areas that we're seeing automation in the governance and management of outsourced operation. But as I said, it's still a nascent space. Okay. Maybe take one more question, right? I think we have about a minute to go. Anil, you talked about adoption of AI-based solutions in conjunction with RPA. Can you give us some examples of where you're seeing this happen?
Yes, of course. So AI-based solutions, the way we are seeing it evolving, there are, and we have kind of called it out earlier as categories, right? So one, we have intelligent document processing, or IDP. Then we have intelligent virtual agents, or your chatbots. And then we have bespoke solutions, right? And the reason why we kind of categorized it this way is IDP and IVA, they've taken productized shapes, meaning they've started to become, or they've started to show some broad applicability across different areas, right? Whereas bespoke AI solutions, they tend to be very fixed in terms of the application itself, and the area itself tends to be somewhat narrower. So for example, a bespoke one could be let's say anomaly detection in payroll, right? Again, very, very bespoke, applicable to that particular use case. But yeah, like I said, IDP, anything where there are documents or unstructured data, you can use IDP. Anywhere where any place where you have any sort of conversation happening, potentially you can use IVA. So I mean, these are the predominant areas that we see today. I would still say that IDP is the larger play as of now, and then IVA, and then bespoke AI solutions. And all of these, by the way, are used in conjunction with RPA, because RPA definitely helps in a lot of the data transport between these solutions and other systems, and it can also help in some of the rules-based validation as well.
Okay, so with that, we come to the end of the webinar, and just to remind everyone, there is an opportunity for you to avail of the automation maturity assessment, where you can get a quick diagnostic and a benchmark of 3 automation metrics. And also, feel free to look up our website for our latest perspectives on this topic. There are lots of blogs, there are lots of new pieces of research on how enterprises can scale automation better. Thanks once again for your time, and we look forward to your participation in future webinars, and hope you found this one useful. Thank you.